All right, we are live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Manny Bernabe Show, where we talk about AI, business, and Industry 4.0. I am your host, Manny Bernabe, and we have a very special guest on the show today. We have Phil Maes, CEO and co-founder of Wizata, who is joining us to talk about unlocking value with AI within the steel manufacturing space. So Phil's going to join us in a moment. First, I want to talk about the sponsor of today's show, Big Plasma AI. That's my innovation agency. We help mid-sized manufacturers develop new data-driven applications and services to stay competitive in an increasingly data-rich world. Okay, so with that, I'm happy to introduce our guest, Phil Maes. Again, he is the CEO of Wizata, and Wizata is a European-based startup. They are building an AI platform to help optimize industrial spaces like metals and mining, chemicals and polymers, and some other very tough areas. So, very important work that they're doing. And we're definitely going to learn more about Wazata. But first, let's talk about Phil and let's talk about what's going on with steel manufacturing and how AI and machine learning can help in that space. So, with that, help me welcome Phil to the show. Hey, Phil, how's it going?
Hey, Manny. Hey, everything's great, and thanks a lot for giving me the opportunity to share about this very interesting subject. And hi to everybody also.
All right. Hey, yes, and thanks, Phil. And again, we are live. The downside to that is that we might have some technical hiccups here and there, but the plus side is that you get to participate as an audience. I'll see your comments. I'll see your comments, any questions in the chat. So drop them in there. Feel free to say hi. But if something comes up that you really like or you want us to talk more about, or if you have a question, drop it in the chat and I'll look through the chat. And if there's anything good that maybe we can talk about, I'll bring it up with Phil and we can talk about that. So with that, Phil, I think we should just jump in. Phil, we're
Sure.
here to talk about AI in steel manufacturing and I guess metals and mining in general. Can you talk to us a little bit about what's going on in that space? What are some of the trends? What are some of the pain points? What are some of the issues that CEOs within this space are navigating today?
Sure. Well, I think apart from if you've been living on Mars for the last 3 years, I think you've noticed that we're in a pretty hectic time right now. And I think the biggest stress these companies are having right now, and that's what they're telling me, is more about the uncertainty of the market. So sure, the demand may be going up right now, but I mean we've had the pandemic and then we've had the war, and so really the demand is like going up and down, and there's a lot of uncertainty. So we know that we're going to have steel, we know that we're going to need it, and we're going to need it more and more. But when and how, that's a different question, and it's very difficult for these companies because they have to like react to an ever-changing market, and the best way to do that is be flexible. But the way they operate and what they have to invest in and what they produce is, of course, massive amounts of infrastructure and assets and big numbers with a very long-term vision and long-term life cycles. So there's kind of a big paradox between to be able to adapt to the demand constantly and manage these investments and these assets. That I think that's one big trend. But overall, they think that it's going to go up a bit. Well, the demand is rising again and will be rising again in 2023. That's one thing. And secondly, I mean, we all know about energy, right? And these companies, they use immense quantities of energy to produce and to produce their steel. I mean, we know they have blast furnaces, electric arc furnaces that use a lot of energy. So that's really hitting their margin very hard. So they have to manage that energy consumption and that margin. And at the same time, they're under pressure to reduce CO2 production. So not only is that they're under pressure for sustainability, but they also under huge cost pressure around energy. So they have to manage that. And as if it was not enough, the world
And there's more, right?
yeah, there's more. The world is really changing now, and we're facing companies that have been producing steel for hundreds of years with very like heavy legacy systems and machinery, and they're faced with digitalization, and they're faced with newcomers and emerging markets who are investing in high-tech equipment and much more modern, and that really have an edge. So the market is very, very competitive, and it's not easy for them to manage that all these changes and all these fluctuations. But there is a good side to it as well. Is that well, luckily the demand is growing, and if we look at data, and more specifically what we want to look at, these companies have been collecting data, so they're actually sitting on a gold mine. And now it's time for them to like exploit this data and gain this competitive edge.
Perfect. So I love those key themes. Theme number one is that these companies have to manage the fact that they have heavy CapEx expense, but they
Yeah,
also have to stay nimble to be able to adapt to fluctuations in demand. That overall the trend is going higher, but there's going to be some peaks and valleys as you go higher. How do you manage that CapEx expense and stay nimble? Number two is around energy consumption. A ton of energy consumption goes into producing metals. How do you manage that? How do you manage your carbon emission? How do you keep costs down there? And then C is how do you keep newcomers at bay? It's a competitive space. You have new companies that are digital first, are software companies first, or more data enabled, and now they're coming into the space as well. So you have to kind of navigate that as well.
yeah, exactly. And often people who don't know much about steel, they think it's a pretty basic product, but that's not true. It's very, very high tech because there are loads of different properties, whether it's physical properties or magnetic properties, and that vary a lot according to demand, in different markets. So it's a very technical and complex product, and having to adapt your production to what the market is asking for also requires a lot of effort. So that's something that I have to take into account also.
Yeah, no, I like that framing. You have the production side and you have to manage that. You have to manage your operations, but then you also have to monitor the demand side and do your forecasting and your optimization there because you have to match those two in a timely way. Can you talk so if those are the sort of the macro trends that are happening in steel, how are what are companies targeting from a business level perspective to try to manage that? So how are companies thinking about being more nimble in say 3 years? How are companies thinking about keeping those costs down? Are there any sort of tangible business objectives and key metrics that they're going after?
Well, they're looking at it from different perspectives. They of course they want to reduce costs. So there's a side of them where they want to reduce costs, and there are different ways of doing that. And then there's another side where they want to optimize yield and performance. So basically, how do you do more with the same assets? Basically. So or how do you do different things? So these are really the two ways they try and do that. And a third way to do it is also to let's say to improve their knowledge, improve their process knowledge, and that's where a bit the digitalization will come. Also, is that these guys they rely on human resources. So they have people, they have operators, process engineers who are doing a great job, and what they need to these people are going to leave at one moment. So that's also a big change, and the knowledge is going to leave the company. So they're also looking at ways to digitalize this and keep this knowledge within the organization, regardless of what the human factor creates as an impact.
Got it. So reducing costs, keeping costs down for sure, optimizing yield, and then capturing that knowledge from people that have been in operations for a while. Those are the kind of the three things that people are going after. And how are you? How is AI? How is machine learning helping with those objectives? Any good use cases that come to mind?
Sure. There are many things. Okay, so and we're going to talk about that later, probably, as how do you make a successful project start? You need to start with the business case. Okay, so these guys, whether it's plant CEO or head of digital or head of maintenance or process, they have a lot of stuff that keeps them awake at night. Okay, and what they're really looking at too is, hey, how can I improve that? How could I use a new tool? That's what AI is really. It's a new tool that helps them solve these problems. So yeah, it can be trying to prevent maintenance. Okay, so trying to see whether machinery is starting to fail before it actually fails. So that, of course, is going to help them a lot and save costs, because you can imagine that if you're a continuous process or you do continuous casting, if ever something goes wrong, and hold on, I have some strange thing here. I just need to shut something down on my own laptop here.
No
Sorry about
worries.
that. Sorry about that, guys.
We are live, folks.
Yeah, we are totally live. So yeah, so if they can actually prevent some assets from breaking down and having downtime or stoppages, it saves them thousands and thousands of dollars an hour. So that's one thing. The second thing, what they want to do is they want to make their processes stable and as let's say as productive as possible. And for that, what they want is they have recommendation. So they're going to move towards data-driven recommendation. I get a question. It's people ask me, yeah, what's AI? Or what does it bring? How can you explain that easily to somebody who's not technical, who doesn't know? And there's a pretty simple way of saying it. It's like you go to a restaurant, you want to order something, and you're going to choose on the menu, and you're going to choose depending on what you've eaten at midday, or what you like, what's the price going to be, what's your time frame, and there are like 7 variables, and you're going to choose your meal, and that's going to be the best decision you take. What happens if you need to make the best possible decision based on, I don't know, 200, 300, 1,000 variables? Human brain doesn't work, cannot compute that. And that's what these process engineers are faced with every day. They want to optimize their processes, but there's so much stuff that can influence that. And that's why data-driven decision and AI can bring them this new tool that enables them to take the best decision based on new variables. So that can improve quality. It can reduce defect rate, because reducing defect rate is also reducing costs and optimizing production. And then there's, of course, the big energy one. That comes back again. We're getting a lot of requests as well, and looking at that around energy consumption. These guys are using gas. In steel, you have annealing sections, you have blast furnaces, you have here in Europe, we have a little city in Luxembourg. We have an electric arc furnace that uses as much electricity as the whole city.
Wow.
So it's really it's huge. So that's a big one, and that's where AI can come in as well. And also, to solve the digitalization of the knowledge. When these guys are retired, having the process knowledge, which is the holy grail in steel, digitalized, it helps also.
Absolutely. I want to come back to energy consumption, because I'm sure that's a
Yeah.
hot topic right now with
Yeah.
energy prices going through the roof. But digitization, I agree with you there. I also think that right now a lot of knowledge doesn't scale very well. So you have one real good technician at a plant, and that person's been there for 20 years. But then how do you take that knowledge and extend it to a new plant, or extend that to a junior employee? And I think that's oftentimes the missed benefit of digitization. This type of knowledge is that you can share it more broadly. I also think that if you're trying to get better over time, it's hard to get better it's a little bit harder if your main body of knowledge is solely with the employees. If you digitize that and you have that in one shared resource, it's easier to kind of just get incrementally better and learn from different edge cases and add that to one body of knowledge and create this nice cyclical kind of trend that keeps you getting better and better with more knowledges, with more outages, with more fixes and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why. And to come back to what you said in the beginning, it's a big pain not being able to replicate, because in the case we have a steel producer, they have like 100 plants across the world. They have a lot of smart people, and these initiatives are often staying in R&D or staying very local, of whether it's data science or machine learning, and they're bringing results, but they're not sharing it and not leveraging on the global scale for a company. And that's why platforms are becoming, of course, more and more relevant for this, because they allow to replicate and scale these initiatives. So for sure, that's a big trend. Huh? That's a big trend, and it's also a challenge.
Yes, I'm sure. Let's see here. Here's a question. You mentioned some key people within the organization. Who is best positioned within the company to be leading something like this? Do you feel like a new AI initiative or digitization initiative, is that coming from a CEO, a CTO, maybe a plant manager? Who's sort of your hero within the organization that's going to help really power this through?
Yeah, actually, the truth is there are many heroes. If there were only one, I believe me, I would not be talking to you. I'd be in a yacht in the Bahamas somewhere if it was so easy. So it's really diverse. It will depend on let's say the corporate organization as well. So will the company or will the steel producer have a digital like umbrella, like a corporate digital strategy that rolls out in each plant, and so the decision will be more centralized on the corporate level, or is it like local? So does the plant CEO or does the head of operations or head of digital promote that internally? And also the stakeholders, and actually the involvement of multiple stakeholders are really part of a successful project. You need, of course, you need sponsorship from the business. You need also in like really dedication and motivation from operations. So because these are the guys that you're really going to help as well to reach the KPIs. You need also involvement from IT and OT because you're going to need to access the data to be able to do that. So it's a multiple it's really multiple stakeholder thing. Ultimately, one person is going to pay this, or one department is going to pay this, but there's no regular answer on that. It will really depend on how the organization is structured. So
That totally makes sense, and I like how you're breaking it down. Yeah, you need involvement from the business folks, you need involvement from the operations folks, and of course, you need IT and OT to help you with the data side. And I think operations as well. I think sometimes that gets overlooked a little bit, but I just find like you really need to connect with the folks on the ground floor because ultimately they're going to tell you where the problems are. They have the subject matter expertise. They're going to validate that your idea is really good. So I always advise my clients to get those folks on board as early as possible.
it's the key. It's the key because nobody knows the process better than the guys actually on the shop floor doing it. So of course we need to talk with the process engineers, and we also, even though we're quite focusing on, like, we're talking about steel here, we do some other process manufacturing, but we don't do many. But we will never, whatever customer you have, I mean, the guys, they know the best. So you need to validate, and also when you work with data, you need to make sure that the data is actually telling the truth.
Right.
The guys, the guys, the guys, they have the real experience. If something breaks down, I mean, it really does break down. And then you look at the data, and is the data actually showing that what's happening in real life? And if you don't have that, you cannot really improve, and you cannot use AI, and you cannot build a real model. That's not going to work out.
That
So
is
interaction is very, very, very important.
that is a great point. I'm going back to my days as an industrial data scientist. We would look at the data for a once worth of time, would come up with all these assumptions and all these models, and then we would show it to a process engineer or a plant engineer, and they would say like, actually no, that data stream is totally wrong, we never pay attention to it, so you shouldn't be using that. And it's like, oh, okay, great, like I just lost a month's worth of time on that. I should have found that out earlier.
No. Yeah, but it's super important. Huh? And you also, when you go on to the plants and you visit these guys, they have big screens and you have stuff flashing everywhere. And you say, hey, aren't you like concerned because you have all these alerts and everything? And say, no, but we know that doesn't matter, or we know that that's not important. But if you just look at it from a data perspective, you will take it into account. So it's you really have to match and work with the process engineers. That's the key. That's one of the key success factors to be able to use AI, and definitely in the steel industry.
And say we have let's say we have like a digital officer or a chief transformation officer within an organization. That person still has to sell frontline people, operators, IT executives. They still have to sell the organization on AI transformation, analytics and machine learning. What's the best way to do that? I mean, that's still kind of I think there's still some skepticism there. Investment dollars are scarce. What's the best way for that person to make that case?
Yeah, it's it's a good question. What we've been confronted once with unions, raising up like in plants and saying, hey, basically you're going to replace us all by machines. Very simplistic view. But yeah, it does require a bit of change management. And the way to do that is to really like involve the people and show them that what we are giving them is a tool. Is
Yes.
we're giving them a tool to do more stuff, okay? Even to IT, from an IT perspective, you say, look, we're gathering data, we can use let's say a time series database or something specific for you. You can use it. You can do more stuff. Mr. Process Engineer, we're bringing AI to you, machine learning to you. We're going to enable you to perform, let's say, tasks, calculations, or whatever you need, and behave like a data scientist, and not like we're going to replace your Excel spreadsheets. That's it. What we really need to do is really enable them, and that's how you can really provide value. That's one thing. Second thing, what we really need to do also is provide some metrics, because and that's really very challenging as well. And we definitely see that in steel. Is even though now these guys they're building plants and having a very long-term vision, as the margin are really compressed and costs are everywhere, they need to have short-term results. So there's a big paradox, because on the one hand, what you do is you implement data and machine learning models that will give best performance and give you the best possible results after long term, because you gather the data, you take the output, you put it back into the model, you improve the model, and the longer you use it, the better it gets. But the companies, what they want short-term results. So prove me that it works. I'm going to spend, I don't know, this amount of money. I want to see after like 6 months or even 3 months, I'm going to see return. And that's not easy. So you really have to convince and to show them the value, to select the metrics with them. Okay. So it's really a very much let's say a combination between stakeholders on the customer side and on our side to let's say align and make sure we're setting expectations, but we're also measuring really the return of what we're doing. So really provide new tools and value, and be able to measure.
I really like that. I think some of the mistakes that have been made by past AI companies have been around leaning too much on automation and streamlining everything, and not focusing enough on the tooling that we're providing to people within an organization. Every job, I feel like, has these tasks that nobody wants to do, that are pretty mundane, and but they have to do them, right? And I feel like a lot of AI helps around that. For example, an operator doesn't want to sit around and just go through a whole bunch of false alarms, and go through 1,000 false alarms, and maybe one that's important. They don't want to do all that. And you can say, like, hey, AI is going to help you find that 1 in 1,000 alarm that is actually relevant for you, and might even give you some suggestions in terms of how to start it off, or how other people in your area have worked on that. So I really like that. I think that's absolutely key, is to show the fact that AI is a tool, and try to present how it's going to help different stakeholders. And you do have to kind of make that case for each one of the stakeholders in terms of why it's beneficial. And I think you're spot on the metrics. Like, yes, this is definitely a long-term capability that we want to build in, but we also have to show some short-term gains in order to keep people committed to the project. I'm wondering, like, do you have certain metrics that you always want to target, like in 6 months? Like, we want to like hit these metrics that you found have been helpful to keep in mind in the short term.
Well, the projects we've been doing, luckily, are purely like operational. So we work on production lines, or so it's let's say the metrics are very measurable. I mean, you want to do predictive or prescriptive maintenance. You want to prevent something breaking down. But it used to break down 5 times in 6 months. The next 6 months, how many times did it break down? I mean, you can calculate it. You can calculate on percentages, on energy savings. It's very tangible. Huh? It's not at all like I don't know. We're not at all in a theoretical context. Huh? When you go to these huge production lines in steel, I mean, it's everything is very real. Huh? So that's the advantage of working like for industries like steel, compared to maybe some service industries or something where it's more like less tangible or tangible in a very long term. So it's really percentages. It's tons per minute. It's defect rate. It's money. I mean, you can measure it in money basically. And it's quite difficult to obtain because, of course, there's a lot of secrecy. So I'm not. This is what if we talk about use cases, I will be very, let's say, very neutral about what I can say, because there's a lot of secrecy about gains and amounts, but it's measurable. And basically, when the initiatives are successful and they combine all these things like the metrics, the stakeholders, the business case, and the success factor, that's where the replication and scaling comes in. And even though you don't always know how much, you know that it works, because otherwise the customers would not like to replicate and multiply over the plants and their assets. So so yeah, it's still, it's very tangible.
That's great, and I like the fact that you're doing that early on in the process. You're not waiting to do a POC and then calculating that. You're doing that in advance, right? You're saying like, okay, here are the metrics that you care about. Here's where you are right now. If this is successful in 3 months, here's where we want to be on all these key metrics in 3 months.
Yeah, exactly. And the POC thing, it's I think there was like what we did 10 years ago. We can't afford the POCs. I mean, we can't afford POCs as a startup or scale up, because we can't afford to work and not be paid. And the companies in steel do not have the resources to try stuff out. I mean, they can maybe do some initiatives, but they don't have the resources to do that, because as you said, and as we talked about earlier, of course, it takes time as well on their side. So the way to be successful and to start up a project is really to get into, let's get real immediately. I mean, we know that, we know the tech work. We know, of course, there's some hurdles like cloud on-prem. That's a big debate within steel as well. But I mean, we know the tech works. We know that the pains are there. We know that we can measure them. So let's get real and start with something small, but something real that we can work.
Uh,
That's something that we believe in. And we see on the market, and we see customers reacting like that.
that's a great point. I've been in the AI industry 4.0 space for some time, and I feel like 4 years ago you could get away with a POC that wasn't going to show you any value for 6 months, because it was still kind of new. But I don't think you can do that anymore. Like customers are saying, like, no, you have a platform. Okay, you have 2 weeks to put everything in, plug everything in, get the data in there, and show me like my actual insights in your platforms. I'm not going to give you 6 months.
No, no, exactly. And there's an important point here in what you just said. It's a, yeah, show it, connect it, and let's do it very quickly. Absolutely right. And that's where something very important comes in also, to be able to perform successfully, is the connectivity part. Because when you have like a steel producer with 70 plants, we have legacy equipment. You have different levels of maturity, and that's a challenge also. Different levels of maturity within the plants. Some plants are really equipped with modern sensors, and you can access them very easily. Some are not at all. So you have to be successful. You have to choose to start somewhere. You have to choose a plant and a process where you have this maturity in terms of data, and that then you can actually really connect through protocols and existing connectors very quickly. But if you need to start searching and looking, and the data is not available, and without, by the way, we have to install sensors and all that, it's going to be a hurdle.
Yes, yes. I want to come back to this notion of maturity and how different companies are probably at different stages and how that's going to change how you do AI. But before that, I want to go back to a previous topic because we were talking about um, metrics and why like working in steel manufacturing, it's pretty straightforward to start setting up AI machine learning projects because you have the key metrics in place. You know what you have to measure. You just have to change the delta and track that. What are some of the challenges in deploying AI and machine learning in steel? If those are the benefits, or those are some of the things that are easier about steel manufacturing is the metrics. What is keeping folks from doing AI well within steel manufacturing?
It's there's a big cultural thing as well, because steel is a very in many cases very traditional industry. Also, maybe we have a bias with that because we're based in Europe, but we do a lot of projects all over the place, and we see that it's pretty traditional. Also, there's from a cultural perspective, You have these guys I mean, they know what they're doing, right? I mean, these process engineers and these operators, they know what they're doing. So they like to challenge us. Okay, so that's there. We've tried everything. That's a good point. We've tried everything. I don't know what it can bring us. So we need to, let's say, demonstrate and show with use cases and explain what we've done and what's been done without sharing too much info, because we have of course the competition thing, but that can be a hurdle. Another hurdle is the cloud, because we strongly believe that to be able to let's say run models and use calculation power, we need to process data. So we need of course to accept, or they need to accept, that part of the data will go up into the cloud and run, even if it comes back down to the edge and is deployed on the edge. And also of course the data quality itself. So sometimes you can have huge quantities of data, but the data is not qualitative. So you need to check, and we were talking about that earlier. Does the data really show what's relevant? That's one thing. Or sometimes you have different data sources, and sometimes you even have manual things, and then you go back to maturity. So how do you include that in the model? So that's not those can be hurdles to be able to perform like a successful project.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think the cultural part is a big one, and I think that's why I like your earlier point around framing AI as a tool to enhance your job. I think there's always, like, in these types of industries, there's always going to be kind of a pushback on the data scientist coming in, the kind of like the college guy coming in with math and computer programming, trying to tell them what to do on their space, their home court. And so I've always found navigating that kind of tough. But like I said, like I like to get down on the factory floor with these engineers and like just see what they're doing, get my hands dirty, and try to ingratiate myself to them as much as possible to get that very valuable information.
No, but absolutely. And also, these, as I said, these guys know what they're doing, but also AI is not magic, huh? And that's what we tell them. AI works really well when you have a stable environment. So when you have stable environment, stable data input, stable process, then the model knows what it's doing, recognizes what's coming in, and knows what to recommend or to prescribe, or whatever. That works fine. But what you also, I mean, these guys or these production, sometimes they change because they need to, like, maybe change their production rate massively, or reduce it, and as soon as you have like big variations, you need to be able to revert back to mathematical models and to what these guys do on a daily basis. So it's not magic. The best solution, what we found right now, is a hybrid between, let's say, AI and some mathematical rules done by the process engineers. Also, a machine will take a decision on a totally unbiased way. And it's also interesting to limit the decision range, let's say, of recommendations or set points that the machine would recommend based on some security. Security points are very important as well, because they know what the constraints are, their machines, in terms of speed, in terms of vibration or temperature or whatever. So you need to put limits as well to what the models can decide by themselves. That's important.
Another great point. AI is not magic. I think that's a key point as you're deploying new AI services, because sometimes if it's a black box, yeah, it's going to be, maybe it's super effective, it's super black, it's a black box. But if you can't explain to the operator why you're getting a particular result, they're not going to trust it. And it's, even if you're giving them really good predictions, if they can't kind of grasp why the model is getting to a particular recommendation, it's going to be harder for them to get on board with it. So I think that's a really good point. I also, yeah, around this hybrid approach, I think that's perfect. I think that's a great way for engineers to feel like they're contributing more to the end solution and not just being replaced. If I'm a process engineer and I get to put in my own physics-based models and I get that complemented with your AI models on your platform, it just feels like I'm being more participatory in the process, in the service, and it's going to make me more likely to use that tool, quite frankly.
Exactly, and that's also why, and the philosophy behind let's say the why and the philosophy behind Wizata also is what we did is we wanted to enable the process engineers to be able to do that, and so the way you build the tool and the platform is you give them a toolbox, where they can perform data science. I mean, with data scientists also, but enabling is the key, because ultimately these big steel producers, they want to keep their process knowledge, right? It's super important for them to keep their IP. They don't want black box solutions. They don't want, say, companies who come to them and say, "Hey, send me your data. We'll run it through our models and we'll give you the output."
Right.
They
No.
don't. They don't. They don't want that. No way. Because they have this knowledge that they've had for 100 years, and I say it's high tech, so they know their secret sauce, they know their processes. They want to keep, if they can improve that and have an edge on the competition with AI, they want to keep that to themselves. Absolutely. So
We got a really nice comment here from Doug on LinkedIn. Great points on an interactive journey. It is an iterative journey is the best journey. Show value early, drive effectiveness, and track the effort. So, really nice summary of some of the points that you were making earlier, Phil. I'm wondering if we can talk a little bit more tactically. So, let's say that a steel manufacturer wants to get an AI initiative going, wants to set up a project. They come to you and the Wazata team. Tell me about what that process looks like for you. How are you setting that up? How are you managing expectations to get that manufacturer off to a great start?
yeah. So as I said, it starts with the business case. So they have to come with a use case. They can't come with us saying, "Hey, this is my data. Tell me what you can do with it." I mean, that will be a waste of time for them and for us. Okay. So the idea is to come with a business case, something very concrete. And then the first step is to make sure that, let's say, the data is aligned with reality, as I said, so we can use it. And then what we're going to do is we're going to check, let's say, what data is relevant to solve their business problem. Because on the line, you have thousands of sensors, and you don't need everything to solve the specific issue. So we're going to have to classify and see what variables have an impact and see what makes sense. That's really the first stage. Okay. Then the second stage will be defining some KPIs. We already know more or less what's reasonable and what's not. Okay. So let's say define KPIs we want to reach together. So us as a company and as a platform and the customer, and connect live. Okay, because what we do makes sense when you're live. I mean, when you want to do prescriptive or recommendations, you need to have live data flowing in. You can play around on historical data, but the value it gives you is much more limited, of course, than if you work live. So you need live data that's aligned with the business and that's complete and that's relevant. Phase one. Okay. Then after that, what you do is you enter this R&D phase where you start building the model. So that can happen in many ways. That can happen either with models that exist in, let's say, in the Wizata platform already, like anomaly detection models that already exist, or we have companies that have data scientists. So they have data scientists to work on these specific problems. And so they will build the models with the process engineers and use us more as a platform to deploy and to replicate. Okay, so we're going to connect, we're going to build a digital twin, and they're going to be able to deploy and replicate their models within this platform. Or if necessary and they really want to, we can also build the models for them, because we have a few data scientists that can help them with the process engineers build the models. And then we're going to enter an R&D phase to see whether what we have done makes sense, fine tune it, and then put it into production. And that whole thing will last, let's say, between 3 and 4 months. And then the real value starts building.
That's great. And I think earlier we talked about helping companies at different levels of maturity. And some companies will have a team of data scientists that they can work with, and other companies won't. But it
Yeah.
sounds like you have them covered either way. So if they have their data scientists, great, here's like a Python notebook that you can jump on and
Sure.
work within our platform. um, and if not, we might be able to help you. Wazata might be able to help you because you have your own data scientists to help with that.
Yeah, we can do that for them. We can do that with them. But ultimately, what we want to do is empower them to do it themselves. Okay. So our ambition also as a company is not to have hundreds and hundreds of data scientists working for us. Okay, that's not the plan. But we can definitely help set up or jumpstart them. And what we've seen in let's say early stage or smaller companies is that they start with us, they see the value, and then they enter a process where they hire their own teams. And so they hire their own teams, build up their own IP. I remind just to set things straight, the IP, whether even if we build it for them, is still their IP. Okay, so they will start building the IP and using the tool, and then they grow without us, and they just use us as what we are designed for, is this platform.
That makes sense. Can you talk a little bit about Wazata's platform? What are some of the aspects of the platform that make it easier for steel manufacturers and other industrial companies to get up to speed with AI and machine learning?
Sure. So what we've built and the way we've designed it is to be, let's say, as usable as possible for non-data scientist people. Okay, so that's a big point. So a lot of drag and drop. You know, we use tools like Blockly for people who know, to be able to build functions with blocks. Without having to code. So no code / low code as much as possible. That's a big asset, and that also let's say enables the onboarding easily. So that's a big aspect of what we're doing and the way we thought it out. Okay. Also, we really what we do is we really design a tool to give context to data. So when we build a digital twin, the idea is not to do a 3D representation of the machinery. That's not what we're looking at. We're looking at giving context to data. What I mean by that is if you have a process, a continuous process. So don't forget, we work with it. Steel is a continuous process. It's not discrete. It's not logistics. It's not automotive. It's continuous processing, which means that if you have an issue like you see a defect or you have a problem in quality or yield, the moment where that occurs is not always, or you notice it, is not always the moment where it happens. So to be able to do that, we need to realign what happens to the process and try and find out where the problem is. So it means that a lot of data that makes sense in a continuous process is not related to vibration data or telemetric data or whatever, or temperature. It's linked to, let's say, the time between machines. So that's very important. So we add additional data, and that's why that's also an important thing in the way we build the platform. Is allow these process engineers to benefit from this information when they build the models.
I'm surprised that it took us that long in the interview to talk about the fact that this is a continuous manufacturing process, because it's continuous and you have like high temperatures. It's one of the hardest manufacturing processes out there, I think. And you're right. Like there's a lot of AI that's maybe built for discrete manufacturing, batch moving, but this is like one molten lot that's moving from machine to machine, and that's a different ball game altogether.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's very very specific.
We have a couple of questions here about digital twins. So, um, are digital twins in steel manufacturing that helpful? And I'll chime in here from my experience, and feel free to jump into. But I feel like digital twins. It depends on how you define them, but pretty much in any industry that has a number of key machines, and I think digital twins are going to be helpful there. Again, you need this data. You need to provide context to it. A digital twin is a really nice framework to add that and to think about all the data streams and how they're relating to one another. But Phil, anything else you want to chime in on that?
No, I think what you said pretty sums it up. And it's also a question of interpretation. What is a digital twin?
Right.
Because a lot of people talking about it, I think maybe a lot of different companies or different suppliers or vendors or whatever have a different vision around it. But what we've noticed, if we want to go a bit high level, we noticed that a digital replication, one way or another, of a process now makes more and more sense for data-driven decision making. Also, for simulation, what-if scenarios, it makes sense to do that. How you do it, I think it's probably it's a very individual, and that really depends on what the vendor is providing and what the customer needs.
Right. And Yukio, I think it's a good question. I also like it from being able to explain why the data is important to frontline operators and engineers. So as a data scientist, you can probably give me a spreadsheet or a database and just fields and data, and that works for me. But most people are visual learners, and so to the extent that you can show them sort of like a just a basic crude representation of a machine and where data points are coming off of and how that machine is connected to the entire process, I just feel like as you're trying to build trust with those operators, those visuals go a real long way. And sometimes they create in themselves a ton of value for the operators. I've been on projects where I'm ready to do deep learning models and all this fancy math stuff, but all they really wanted was a visual of their processing machine, and that's where I got most of my value, and I was done. Um, so I don't know if you've seen that, Phil.
I've seen that. I totally get what you're saying, and also it also makes replication easier, because I'm not going to say it's a template and a copy paste, because that would be maybe a bit too easy. But it does help. Like, you have a company that has multiple assets or multiple lines that are identical. Once you can start to replicate and copy paste from with a digital perspective, it helps replicate and scale it. It improves the process and accelerates it. Okay, doesn't mean that you still have to map some senses and make sense out of what you're doing, but visual tools also make you work much faster.
Great point. I think Yukio, you always want to be focused on how you're going to scale past that initial 4 to 6 month R&D phase that Phil explained. So, it's okay if it takes you 2 months to onboard a particular machine, get everything piped in, but it cannot take you 2 months to onboard the next machine. Companies are just not going to tolerate that. They want to see that every time you onboard a new machine, a new plant that's similar, that onboarding period from data to value is getting shorter and shorter and
Yeah,
shorter and shorter with less cost and less cost. I mean, that skill you always have to keep front in mind as you're doing these projects. Am I right, Phil?
yeah, exactly. And as you say, and also scaling must become autonomous. So we cannot just redo every time the work for the customer. It doesn't make sense. So if you have to give a maximum amount of tools to these guys so they can actually scale and replicate themselves.
Uh, Absolutely, and I think that that's in line with the Wazata value system, which is like you don't want to be doing every part of the job for them in and continuously forever. You want to empower them and show them how to do it so that they can do it on for themselves. We have another comment here, another question here from Vikan. Do you already have the best practice templates for digital twins and dashboards for steel industry? So I guess I'm wondering, because you're in steel, Phil, you and Wizata, I'm assuming you have some sort of template in terms of what that looks like. What's the ideal dashboard
Yeah.
for a new steel manufacturer? Maybe you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, we have some. Obviously, it's a very very big subject, but we have some. So yeah, stickle mill we have, rolling mill we have, certain equipment we have, but we of course we don't have, let's say, the twin of a whole steel plant. We haven't been lucky enough to do that yet, but certain assets or certain production lines, we do have templates, libraries with the machinery, and the dashboards. Yeah, the way we work is actually we provide a tool to enable our customers to build their own dashboards, and it's really, I mean, it's quite easy to use. It's always the same philosophy. We provide stuff so that they can use and replicate themselves. So yeah, we can. If you have an idea, Vic, we can definitely accelerate with by providing that kind of stuff.
Great questions from the audience. Keep them coming. Keep the comments coming. Really appreciate that engagement. That's the whole benefit of doing this live. Phil, I'm wondering. We have about 10 more minutes left. I'm wondering if you
Yeah.
can spend some time talking about a use case. Is there a manufacturer that comes to mind? Of course, I don't want you to mention any names.
No.
Um, where maybe they had a really good outcome, and what did you see from that manufacturer in terms of their leadership? Where they were in terms of their digital maturity that made their implementation of AI a success.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I'm not going to name any names, but if you want names, just go to our website. You'll
All
find
right.
some. Okay, so yeah, so we have one pretty interesting story where a manufacturer came to us and said, "Look, we have these huge ovens, and what we need to do is we need to stabilize them because they use a huge quantity of energy. It's a very, of course, in steel, you have long inertia. So you have big things that heat up basically and stay hot for a very long time. And so the idea was to provide a model that could give, let's say, the best possible stability to these ovens and predict temperature and let's say provide better quality for a better output. So we worked on this in one plant very locally and got really good results. And it was very interesting because we could compare over, let's say, a few months the behavior of the oven compared to what an operator was doing. How many set point changes he made, how many set points did the machine make. Much more unbiased and regular, and we got really good results. And so this customer, they scaled this over multiple plants, and now they're replicating it themselves. So the first project took probably about 6 months, the second 2 months, and now to connect one of these ovens takes them about one day. So that's a pretty cool project. And also we had collateral effects. So the main core business case was like stabilize, but we had a lot of collateral effects. Like stable means also using less energy. So they saved a bit of energy by being stable because you don't have these big variations where they have to compensate. It also provided, let's say, less maintenance because you don't have breakages. So the machine is more stable, it's more predictable. And also, interestingly enough, by scaling, they realized that even though they thought that these machines had very different behaviors in each plant in each countries, when you enter this scale at this stabilization phase, they realized that actually the behavior was quite similar, and that allowed them to anticipate. So really better quality, less maintenance, less energy, and once again very measurable, for them. So that's a pretty good example, I think.
That's great.
Yeah,
Sorry to
yeah,
interrupt, Phil,
sure.
but I'm wondering. Yeah, sometimes different companies will have various different levels of success. Was there something about this company that stood out? Like, did they have like a really good CEO that was giving them cover from the top down? Did they have like a good plant engineer that was super innovative and said like, "Hey, Phil, I want to work with you and the team. Let me know how I can help." What were those attributes of that good use case?
Um, yeah, I think that the company is evolving in a highly competitive environment. So they really wanted to have an edge in on the competition, and they also immediately attacked one of their core processes. So they didn't try to provide value on a little thing on the side or a little line somewhere. They really immediately said, okay, this is the core process. This is where the money is, and this is where we need to optimize. Yeah, we have the support from quite really high level, and from operations, OT, IT, everybody was on board. So that of course helps. And then the skeptics were there, as they always are, but if you take them with you and you show, I mean, you get there and you provide value.
I really like that. That's right. Go where the money is. Go where the core problem is. And I also like the notion of doing AI in a part of your business that is central to your company value, right? Like sales, marketing. That's important, but everybody has to do sales and marketing. Not
Yeah.
everybody has to smelt iron into steel. And if you're gonna have some differentiator with AI, that's kind of where you want to have it, some place that is absolutely central to your business and your business value, and where you're going to be able to get an edge. So I think that's a really good use case. We have some other good questions and comments here around optimizing energy consumption, but we're coming up on time. I think Faz, thank you for your question. I will have you maybe reach out to the Wazata team on LinkedIn, and I'm sure they're going to be able to get back to you on that front. But with that, Phil, can you tell us a little bit about how to get in touch with Wizata? How do we follow you? What's the best way to connect?
So I think the best way to connect is either through the website or through LinkedIn. And we're super active on LinkedIn. So don't hesitate to connect to me, reach out to me. Manny has got a few contacts also related to the company. And I think that's the best channel. So don't hesitate.
Perfect. Yes. And I've got to compliment your marketing team on LinkedIn. Ricky, and I forget there's another gentleman on there, but they are super active. They're always adding value. It's fun. So hats off to that team. Me and Ricky connected some time ago, and we just stayed in touch. So hats off to that team. You guys are doing a great job.
Thanks a lot, Manny. Yeah, I think so too. We got other compliments from a customer this morning about that. So
Oh,
great.
really? Great.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, no, I mean it's you guys are doing really good on that front, especially with the LinkedIn social media stuff. All right. So with that, Phil, thank you so much for coming on the show. I am gonna have show notes out pretty soon, so head over to LinkedIn and check out the Manny Bernabe show on LinkedIn for replay, show notes, and I'll also provide links to where you can follow Phil and how you can get in touch with the Wazata team. But with that, Phil, I got a ton of notes here, a lot of great content, and that I'm going to process. Thank you so much for coming on the show, and I think we should do
Thank
it again
you.
sometime.
Definitely. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Thanks for the great questions, and we'll see you next time.